The old days are over when America supported Europe just because it always had.
Europe choosing Canada over the US proves that their leaders actually have some brain cells and know better than to rely on America's mess.
We're not going to America. We're not spending our money there. It's Canada first.
Donald Trump threatens another auto tariff.
We're going to do it on April 2nd.
It's not about threats, it's about the US sabotaging itself with tariffs, trade wars, and sky-high LNG prices.
Tonight, airlines brace for a slowdown as Canadians cancel trips to the US.
Meanwhile, Canada is set to triple its exports by 2030, effortlessly taken over. The US just got played, and played hard. Europe took one look at American LNG prices, laughed, and ran straight into Canada's arms. And guess who's losing his mind over it? Yep, Donald Trump, the self-proclaimed king of energy dominance. He fumbled the bag. Let's break down how the US got left in the dust while Canada casually snatched its biggest gas customer.
Tonight, there are signs of a boycott brewing. Tariff threats spurring Canadians to fight back with their wallets.
So for decades, Europe had a sweet deal. They got their natural gas dirt cheap from Russia while using US LNG as a backup plan. Everything was fine and dandy until 2022 hit, and Russia invaded Ukraine, sending Europe into a full-blown energy panic. Russia turned off the tap, and suddenly, Europe was frantically calling the US for help. And guess what? The US did what it always does: charge an arm and a leg. LNG prices skyrocketed with ridiculous long-term contracts and outrageous transportation costs.
For the dialogue between Trump and Putin. And I think it's up to them, but they can discuss everything they want, but not about Ukraine without us.
Enter Canada, the quiet genius in the background, just waiting for its moment. A stable, resource-rich, non-dramatic country that could deliver LNG cheaper, faster, and cleaner. And guys, did Europe jump at the opportunity? Washington is screaming, crying, throwing tantrums, while Canada is casually signing LNG contracts like it's Black Friday at Best Buy. Trump, who never stops bragging about America first, is watching his so-called energy dominance get flushed down the drain. And the best part? It's all his fault.
Canadians that we need to stick together and as unity, and I raise my children to feel the same, be proud Canadian.
Now, let's talk numbers, because they do not lie. Europe got absolutely burned by its over-reliance on a single energy supplier, Russia. When Putin shut off the gas, it triggered a 450% price spike in 2022 alone. Europe desperately needed a plan B. The US saw this as its big moment to shine, but instead of saving the day, they handed Europe a bill so big it looked like the Pentagon's defense budget.
In no uncertain terms that Europe cannot count on the U.S. anymore, that the relationship with the United States is evolving, and there may come a time when the U.S. simply says no.
U.S. LNG costs between $12 to $14 per million BTU. Expensive, ridiculous, not sustainable. Canada's projected LNG cost $7 to $9 per million BTU. Way cheaper, way smarter. But here's where the U.S. really screwed up. Gulf Coast export terminals are a logistical nightmare. Shipping from there to Europe takes forever and costs a fortune. Long-term contracts are straight up medieval. The US expects Europe to sign 15 to 20-year contracts with zero flexibility. Who wants that? No one.
Decades of this old relationship between the United States and Europe is ending, and that Europe needs to adjust to that.
Trump-era tariff threats made things worse. Europe was already skeptical about depending on the US, and Trump's constant trade war nonsense was the last straw. Meanwhile, Canada is just sitting up north with its feet up, sipping maple syrup, watching the US fumble their biggest customer. So why did Canada become the obvious choice? It's not run by a reality TV host who makes decisions based on Twitter tantrums. Shorter shipping distance. Canada's LNG can reach Europe 35% faster than the US cleaner LNG. Europe is all about net zero emissions, and Canada's LNG fits the bill.
Zelensky called on Europe to band together and defend their own interests, and he said it should be done through European armed forces. He literally called it an armed forces of Europe so that Europe's future depends on European needs.
Stable government, no random trade wars or tariff meltdowns every 6 months. And now, the most embarrassing part for the US. Canada isn't just competing, it's dominating. Let's talk LNG mega projects. LNG Canada, Kittymate, BC, is backed by Shell, Petronas, Total Energies. It's launching in 2025 and will pump out 2 billion cubic feet per day. Goldboro LNG, Nova Scotia, is about to make direct Europe supply effortless. Quebec and Newfoundland are stepping into the game too. Meanwhile, the US is scrambling. If Canada grabs even 25% of Europe's LNG market, the US loses $20 billion by 2030. 20 billion. That's enough money to build another Trump Tower in every state and still have cash left over for gold-plated cheeseburgers at Mar-a-Lago.
Let's focus on understanding ourselves right here in Europe. We must give strength to Europe first. Does America need Europe as a market? Yes. But as an ally, I don't know.
U.S. energy companies are panicking, begging Washington for tax breaks and subsidies just to stay in the game. But here's the final slap in the face. Europe has already made its choice. Over 60% of new LNG contracts for 2024 to 2025 are being signed with Canada instead of the U.S. The U.S. is officially out, and Canada is in Trump's entire legacy of America First was basically a one-way ticket to Canada First. The man bragged nonstop about how U.S. energy would dominate the world, but all he did was make American LNG so expensive that Europe literally ran to Canada's doorstep begging for a deal, and Canada took that opportunity and ran with it.
And so Zelensky called on Europe to band together and defend their own interests, and he said it should be done through European armed forces. He literally called it an armed forces of Europe so that Europe's future depends on European needs.
Trump's obsession with tariffs, trade wars, and his tough guy act made U.S. energy less competitive instead of more powerful. In 2019, he slapped a 10% tariff on Canadian aluminum, which soured U.S.-Canada relations for no reason. Then, in 2020, he threatened new energy tariffs, making Europe even more skeptical about trusting the U.S., while Canada just kept building LNG infrastructure quietly, without drama, without trade war tantrums, without random tweets at 3 a.m.
Europe's future depends on European needs.
And here's the ultimate irony. Trump's policies didn't just fail. They backfired so badly that he accidentally helped Canada steal the US's biggest LNG customer. Washington was so busy fighting imaginary battles with China that no one even noticed Canada securing Europe's energy future right under America's nose. It's almost poetic. The US was too focused on owning its trade rivals, but the only thing they got owned by was a country known for politeness and maple syrup.
Are we really still capable and able to rely on the United States, or should we rely only on ourselves?
And it's not just Canada pushing the US out of the energy market. The entire LNG trade war is shifting, and the US is losing from all sides.
A few days ago, President Trump told me about his conversation with Putin. Not once did he mention that America needs Europe at the table. That says a lot.
Let's talk about Russia. Remember how Europe was dependent on Russian gas for years? Well, after the Ukraine invasion in 2022, Russia lost its biggest customer, and you'd think that'd be bad for them. Nope, Putin just turned around and sold more LNG to China, 40% more in 2023 to 2024 to be exact. And now, Russia is partnering with India for energy deals, cutting the US out of the picture completely.
Time is really very important, I think, diplomatic investment for the future, just and lasting peace for Ukraine.
Meanwhile, OPEC is making its own moves. Qatar, UAE, and other Middle Eastern suppliers are now offering massive price cuts just to make sure they stay ahead of Canada. Qatar alone is handing out 20-year contracts with 10% price reductions because they see Canada coming for their market share and are scrambling to keep Europe locked in. And where's the US in all this? Stuck in the middle of an LNG crisis it created for itself. American LNG suppliers are in complete panic mode because they only have two terrible options: lower prices to compete with Canada and lose billions in revenue, keep prices high and watch Europe completely ditch them for Canada, Qatar, and Russia.
We can't rely on the United States. We have to rely on Europe. And now is time for Europeans to do more not only to defend their continent, but also to help and secure Ukraine's future.
Either way, US LNG is on life support. The only thing Washington is exporting now is regret. The damage is already massive. Europe has officially moved on from the US, and it's not just about gas, it's about political leverage. For decades, the US used energy dominance as a way to control Europe. Need LNG? Better play nice with Washington. Want cheaper contracts? Too bad. Sign a 20-year deal and shut up. Trying to avoid price spikes? Guess you'll have to deal with US trade policies.
The United States under Donald Trump has a tendency to turn friends into enemies and enemies into friends. That's not the way in which most Europeans think the world ought to be run.
But now that leverage is gone. Europe doesn't need US gas anymore. Washington can't use energy as a bargaining chip because Canada swooped in and took the entire deal. And they did it without a single tweet, without a single tariff, and without a single big announcement press conference. They just did the work. And while Trump is probably somewhere screaming about how Canada stole our market, the truth is he handed it to them on a silver platter. His tariffs, trade wars, and strongman policies made the US so unreliable and so overpriced that Europe had no choice but to leave.
The United States under Donald Trump has a tendency to turn friends into enemies and enemies into friends. That's not the way in which most Europeans think the world ought to be run.
So now Canada is set to triple its LNG exports by 2030, while the US is stuck with a shrinking market, declining revenue, and an energy empire that's collapsing faster than Trump's legal defenses. At this point, the US can either fix its broken LNG pricing model or just accept the fact that it lost. Either way, Canada is already celebrating. Trump's America First energy dream? A complete joke. Turns out, the only thing he made great again was Canada's LNG market. Subscribe now, because watching the US fumble its LNG empire is the best entertainment you'll get today.